Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about something called video game preservation, or as I like to call it, the Snuffleupagus. Do you know why? Because it doesn't exist! While other types of music nowadays, such as film, TV, music, hell, even tweets, have people by the dozens carefully cataloging and preserving them, video games kind of get the short end of the stick in this department. And it's really too bad too, because I can guarantee you someday this era of video gaming is going to be looked back on as kind of like the silent era of film, where over 90% of the films made during that period were lost forever. While video game preservation may not currently be as bad as losing 90% of all titles, it's still by no means good. To begin, let's talk about the great wide world of the internet. While I can't find a statistic online, I can assure you the amount of games lost because they were hosted online is egregious, to say the least. Popular browser games come and go all the time in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, mobile phones have games that become completely lost almost every day. The most famous example of this is, of course, Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird was a hugely popular mobile game known for its addictive gameplay and unforgiving difficulty. But one day the creator moved it from the App Store, and that was that. There is now no way to play the real original Flappy Bird, unless you own a phone that had the game downloaded onto it during the less than 1 year it was available on the App Store. And the game will only work if you haven't updated that said phone since the removal. It's only been about 6 years and Flappy Bird's basically completely gone. Well, yes, you can still technically play various recreations, many of which are quite faithful to the original. You will still never play the Flappy Bird again. And those recreations only exist in the first place because of Flappy Bird's massive popularity. Think of the thousands of other games on the App Store and online over the years that are now gone for real, simply because they weren't massive enough successes at the time and got removed quietly. Now you may be saying to yourself, Nick, I don't care about browser and mobile games. To which I would tell you, yeah, nobody does. But it doesn't stop there. I would now present Exhibit B to the court. Online services. Over the years, thousands of games have been lost when online services are shut down. This goes as far back as the downloadable games Nintendo released through its Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Satellaview Network, to more modern examples like DSiWare and all of the WiiWare games. When it comes to games strictly offered through online services, these games get the worst treatment. When a company drops support for an online service, that's it. There's no way to play or download whatever games were available through their respective company anymore. And unlike a lot of physical games which have been preserved by fans, more on that later, once these games are gone, they are gone for good, with limited exceptions. This is one of the reasons I'm so against DLC and paywalls in modern video games. Because the second a company drops support for that retrospective game generation, there'll be no way to experience that portion of the game unless it's re-released onto a modern console with its DLC included. Now finally, we have our last broad category, physical games. Physical games are pretty much the only type of video game at this time that even have a fighting chance of preservation. The first difference is that game companies themselves will often port over their big breadwinners to new generations of consoles in order to maximize their profits. However, this does bring up one of the major issues with video game preservation. Right now, video games are not yet seen as an art form by the broad public, or by companies that own them. Let's use Nintendo as an example. For years now, Nintendo has been releasing, at most, the same 100 or so NES games through various avenues for people to play on modern systems. This is true of many other game consoles and companies we know and love as well. But why, might you ask? Because the gaming industry is solely focused on making money. It's quite possibly the greediest industry in media. Sorry, but you're fooling yourself if you think Nintendo keeps re-releasing Super Mario Bros. Because it's a classic that's embedded in culture. No, it's because they can monetize it. Nintendo still makes money off this game to this very day. And while I wouldn't be opposed to that in general, I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to make money, this view has resulted in many games being lost. You don't see the WiiWare games getting re-released simply because Nintendo considers them one-offs, with no more potential for profit in the future. Which, to be fair, is true. If Nintendo re-released all of the WiiWare games to the public, only a niche audience would buy and play them. This is one of the reasons we need better video game preservation so badly. Because the games that companies can't see themselves making more money on, just don't get brought over to new generations. And in a few years, when the industry is almost entirely digital, this problem's only going to get worse. But back to physical games. As I said earlier, Nintendo only cares about 100 or so of its NES titles, which is a library that consists of over 700 games. What happens to the rest of them? What happens to the thousands of games for consoles like Xbox or PlayStation? While it is true that the majority of physical games are left behind by video game companies, and with each passing day, more and more game discs decay and get destroyed, NES carts rot and batteries die, but most of these games are archived and preserved. Video game fans are dedicated, and since it's much easier to rip ROMs from physical games than it is for online releases, almost all physically released games ever can be found on the internet in some form or another. The growing circle of people dedicated to preserving video game history is the reason you can still play an NES game like Bible Adventures. But oh god, why would you want to? The obscure games that companies don't care about are for the most part well taken care of. But I do wish there was a larger movement to preserve video game history. As it stands right now, and we keep moving towards an entirely digital gaming industry, with companies that don't care about preserving the vast majority of their games, we're set to begin losing more games in the future rather than less. My only hope is that in the future, game preservation will start to be taken more seriously, so that someday there will be just as big a well-preserved catalog for them as there is for music, television, and film. Which is why I'm starting my own video game preservation group, the GDPBA. No, that's not an acronym for an STD. It stands for Gamers Determined to Preserve Bible Adventures, so that way you and your family can play it for the rest of time.